I just became an obstacle to dismantling Amtrak.
Less than 2 weeks ago, the Senate voted in favor of bipartisan legislation to revitalize Amtrak and move it forward. That legislation passed the Senate by a vote of 93-6. And it was intimated that the payback to the Senate from the chairman of the board of Amtrak, that was a kind of retribution for our misbehavior.
My name is David Gunn, formerly, as we all know now, President and Chief Executive Officer of Amtrak.
How many years have you been in the railroad business, Mr. Gunn?
I was on my 42nd year, if you include transit in that mix. I think that I am very concerned about the agenda that the administration and the board has. What happened is that it's clear to me that I became an obstacle to a plan to, I think, basically to do away with the corporate structure in Amtrak and to implement the administration's plan for passenger rail service, which is really not a plan at all. It's a plan of just destroying the corporation and turning the Northeast Corridor over to a committee of governors and let them deal with it. I think that's what happened, and I was an obstacle. I think I was definitely an obstacle to the dismantling of Amtrak, and that's why I'm sitting here as the former president. I firmly believe that this nation needs passenger rail service, and I think that dismantling Amtrak is not the right way to go. And I think that I just became an obstacle to dismantling Amtrak, and I think what right today, Amtrak is the gene pool for passenger rail, intercity passenger rail service in this country. And if it isn't treated in a fairly thoughtful way, you're going to set back passenger rail service in this country decades. The destruction of Amtrak, which I think is possible, will ultimately devastate our most precious asset, the human capital or knowledge base required to operate high-speed passenger transportation, and set back any plans for intercity passenger rail. I really think the bulk of our employees do a good job and they care about the railroad. I have issues on work rules and all that sort of thing, but the employees, I think, are a first-class bunch. Our employees, by and large, are professional and they're good people and they're good railroaders. Well, even though I disagree with some of the work rules and things like that, they're a good bunch. What is at stake today is the future of Amtrak and intercity passenger rail in the United States. What is required is some idea of what the end result we want is and a thoughtful plan to get there. And we don't know either of those. I was surprised last August when our general counsel received the directive from the board chairman to create an NEC subsidiary at the September board meeting. I was told that it was a, quote, fait accompli. This unilateral action ultimately resulted in my termination last Wednesday. The current board stands in contrast to the previous board, where all seats were filled and there was a true sense of collegiality and trust among the management and the board. If you look at the resolution on this separation, it says, resolved that management is authorized and directed to take all appropriate action to create the Northeast Corridor subsidiary. It is not a study. First of all, the idea that you have to separate the corridor to prevent funding from bleeding from capital to operating is nonsense. Our budgets are set up, and the way our money is appropriated is operating money, debt service, and capital. And we do not fund the operation out of deferrals of capital. We do not do that. We're very rigorous about segregating the funds into their proper buckets. The other thing is that this whole issue of creating a subsidiary, it is an enormously complicated effort, which is probably going to result in lawsuits of the board from various parties. And it has no benefit that they aren't going to get this board meeting when Amtrak prepares its accounts according to business lines that are contained in the strategic plan. It is a specious argument to say you need to create the subsidiary for clarity. That is absolute nonsense, in my opinion. My concern has always been that the corridor should remain a vertically integrated railway, and the administration proposal clearly calls for separating and disposing of the corridor to the states or whoever. And my position has been that whatever you do with the corridor, it should remain a vertically integrated railway so that someone is in charge of train operation and maintenance. My main concern with all of the action over separating, of creating a subsidiary, is that the administration and actually the chairman last spring they were trying to separate operations from maintenance. My concern is that the corridor, whoever runs it, be a vertically integrated railway. And what I fear is that we've reverted to the original intent of the administration and the chairman to separate operations from infrastructure. That's wrong. It's bad railroading. Whether it's private, whether it's public, whether it's Amtrak or a state-controlled railroad, you want a vertically integrated railway.
Can you think of any good reason to separate the infrastructure from the operation other than to sell the infrastructure?
No, the issue of clarity, the argument of clarity, I think is a bogus one. The board is going to get an accounting system at the next board meeting which will give them clarity in terms of how Amtrak spends its money. The real risk is the confusion that you have a fragile accounting system at Amtrak. It is, as GAO has pointed out, and as we would point out, it is very manual and it has some real systems problems. We've been able to work around those. What this will do is create not clarity but confusion. And I think there's no business reason for doing this to provide clarity. That is not, you cannot justify this on the basis of clarity.
Mr. Gunn, do you know of a passenger rail service that is profitable?
No. I will say this, Mr. Rosen's mentioned the Japanese railway system. After the government invested $100 billion in new tracks and rights-of-way, they barely cover their operating expenses. The nation's transportation systems, air, highway, even waterways and rail are in trouble. Both freight and passenger mobility is deteriorating. Intercity rail service, passenger service, in carefully selected urban corridors offers potential relief at the lowest total cost. The current method of funding, regulating, and governing passenger rail service will not permit intercity rail service to reach its full potential. I firmly believe that this nation needs passenger rail service.